There was once a small town, tucked between rolling green hills and the kind of river that sparkled like a ribbon of silver in the sunlight. The people here lived simple lives. They knew each other's names, shared bread at each other's tables, and whispered secrets under the shade of willow trees. It was in this town, on a summer evening full of fireflies and hope, that a love story began. Emily was the kind of young woman people noticed, not because she was loud, but because her spirit shone like the morning sun. She had soft brown eyes that carried dreams too big for the little town she called home. She wanted to be a teacher, to shape minds, to give children more than she had ever been given. And though her family didn't have much, her heart overflowed with kindness, warmth, and the belief that love, true love, could conquer anything. And then there was Richard. Richard was handsome in that way young men sometimes are, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a smile that could melt away a girl's worries. He had charm, the kind that drew people close, like moths to a flame. But underneath that charm, there was a restlessness, an uneasiness that no one could quite name. Richard loved freedom, the open road, late nights, and the idea that tomorrow could be different from today. When Emily and Richard met, it was as if the world slowed down. It happened by the riverside, where Emily often sat with her books. Richard came by on his old bicycle, dust swirling behind him, and when he saw her, he stopped. Their first conversation was awkward, sweet, and full of nervous laughter. But from that moment on, Richard was drawn to her gentle strength, and Emily was captured by his boldness. They spent days together, walking along dirt paths, talking about everything. The future, their fears, the things they wanted but didn't yet have. At night, they would meet under the stars, whispering promises as though the night sky itself was listening. One evening, Richard took Emily's hand as fireflies lit up around them. "Emily," he said, his voice low and certain, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want it to be with you. Always." Emily's heart swelled. She believed him. She believed in love, in him, in the promise that two people could write their own destiny. Their love blossomed quickly. It was the kind of love that filled songs and stories, the kind that made the air feel lighter, the days brighter. Emily trusted him fully, and Richard, for a time, let himself believe he could be the man she needed. But promises are fragile things when they are built on fear. When Emily discovered she was carrying Richard's child, she was afraid, but also deeply hopeful. She pictured a family, a little home, laughter echoing through its walls. She imagined herself teaching, Richard working, and their child growing up safe, surrounded by love. With her heart pounding, she told him one evening, her eyes shining not just with fear, but with joy. At first, Richard said nothing. He looked at her, then at the ground, then back at her again. His smile faded, and in its place came panic. "A baby," he whispered, as though the word itself was too heavy to carry. "Yes," Emily said softly, her hands trembling. "Our baby. Richard, we can do this. We'll figure it out together." But Richard's mind was racing. He thought of lost nights, of burdens, of being trapped in a life he hadn't chosen. The freedom he clung to now seemed to slip through his fingers. "I can't," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'm not ready for this. Emily, I never asked for this." Her heart broke with each word. She reached for him, desperate to hold on, desperate to make him see that love was enough. "Richard, please. This is our chance. We can make a family. We can build something beautiful." But Richard pulled away, his voice rising with fear. "No, Emily. I can't be tied down like this. I can't be a father. I'm sorry." And just like that, he was gone. Emily stood there, stunned, her tears falling silently into the dirt. The man who had promised her forever had left her with nothing but a shattered heart and the tiny life growing inside her. That night, she sat by her window, the moonlight spilling across her face. She held her hands against her stomach, whispering words of love to the baby that Richard had rejected. "It's just you and me now," she said softly. "And I promise, I'll never leave you. I'll give you everything I have. I'll protect you, no matter what." Her voice shook, but it was strong, stronger than the fear, stronger than the heartbreak. The days that followed were hard. Whispers spread through the town, whispers of shame, of judgment, of pity. But Emily held her head high. She found work, saved every coin she could, and prepared herself for the road ahead. She would not let her child suffer for Richard's mistakes. Still, in the quiet of night, when no one could hear, Emily wept. She wept for the love she thought would last forever, for the dreams she had built in her heart, and for the man who had promised to stay but ran instead. But even in her tears, there was resolve. Her love for her child began to grow stronger than her pain. She realized that sometimes love is not about the promises whispered under the stars. Sometimes love is about sacrifice, about standing tall when the world wants you to crumble, about choosing to stay when someone else walks away. And so, Emily carried her child with courage. Alone, but never truly alone, because in her heart, she knew the baby inside her was a gift born of pain, yes, but also of love, the love she had given freely, and the love she would now pour into her son. As summer turned to autumn, the leaves falling in fiery colors around her, Emily took one last look at the places where she and Richard had once walked hand in hand. The riverside, the dirt paths, the firefly-lit nights. She let the memories settle like dust in the wind, and she turned her face toward the future. The chapter of first love had ended, but another was about to begin. The chapter of a mother's love, stronger than heartbreak, fiercer than abandonment, unbreakable by time. Emily's world had changed forever. With Richard gone, she was left not just with a broken heart, but with a life growing inside her. Alone, she carried the weight of her future in her hands, yet she refused to let despair consume her. Her belly grew, and with it, her determination. When whispers filled the town, unkind voices that judged her, pitted her, and gossiped behind her back, Emily walked with her chin lifted high. She learned quickly that people are quick to condemn what they don't understand. Against her chest, tears streaming down her face, she named him Daniel, a name that meant God is my judge. For Emily, it was a promise that no matter what the world said, her son would not be defined by Richard's absence or by the shame the town tried to place upon them. From that moment, her life revolved around him. The years that followed were not easy. Emily worked wherever she could, waiting tables at the diner, scrubbing floors in wealthy homes, sewing late into the night by the dim light of a single lamp. Her hands grew rough from scrubbing, her back ached from bending, but she never complained. Every penny she earned went into food, clothes, and schoolbooks for Daniel. When there wasn't enough money for both of them to eat, Emily skipped her meals, telling her son she wasn't hungry, though her stomach twisted in knots. At night, when Daniel was fast asleep, Emily would sit by the window, the moonlight spilling across her weary face, and whisper prayers into the darkness. Prayers for strength, for wisdom, for her son's future. But hardship did not break her. It shaped her. And through it all, Daniel watched. From a young age, Daniel could see the sacrifices his mother made. He noticed the holes in her shoes she stitched herself, so she could buy him a pair of new ones. He noticed how tired she looked after work, yet still smiled when she read him bedtime stories. He noticed the whispers in town, the way people looked at them with pity, or worse, with disdain. But instead of breaking him, it lit a fire in him. By the time he entered school, Daniel had a determination that set him apart. He studied harder than anyone else. He asked questions that made his teachers pause, realizing this boy was not just bright, he was destined for something greater. At home, he tried to ease his mother's burdens in small ways. He read aloud to her while she sewed. He picked wildflowers from the roadside to brighten their table. He once told her, with a seriousness far beyond his years, "Mama, one day you won't have to work so hard. I'll take care of you. I promise." Emily smiled through tears, brushing the hair back from his forehead. "And I promise, Daniel, I'll never stop believing in you." As Daniel grew older, his world expanded, but his loyalty to his mother never wavered. In high school, he excelled not only in academics but also in debates, where his voice carried power and conviction. His classmates admired him, teachers praised him, and neighbors began to whisper new words, this time words of respect. Emily's boy is going places, they said. He earned a scholarship to college, the first in his family to ever attend. Emily stood in the crowd on his graduation day, her eyes shining with pride as he walked across the stage. Her sacrifices had not been in vain. But Daniel wasn't finished. He pushed further, earning a place in law school. The nights were long, the work was demanding, but every time he thought about giving up, he remembered his mother working 2 jobs, her hands raw from labor. He remembered the nights she cried softly when she thought he was asleep. And he remembered the promise he made as a boy, to give her the life she deserved. Even as Daniel became a man, the bond between mother and son remained unshakable. On breaks from school, he came home and sat with Emily at the same kitchen table where they once shared bowls of thin soup. He told her about his classes, his dreams, and the ways he wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Daniel sat beside his mother on the porch. He looked at her hands, still rough, still bearing the scars of years of work, and felt his heart ache. "Mama," he said softly, "everything I am, everything I will ever be, it's because of you." Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "No, Daniel, it's because of the fire inside you. All I did was fan the flame." But Daniel knew better. That flame had been lit by her love, her sacrifice, her unwavering strength. By the time Daniel finished law school, Emily no longer saw the small boy who once brought her wildflowers. She saw a man, strong, determined, unshaken by the hardships of his past. And as he stood tall in his cap and gown, smiling at her from across the crowd, Emily realized something profound. Though Richard had abandoned them, though she had faced years of loneliness and sacrifice, she had never truly been alone. Because in Daniel, she had found not just a son, but a partner in survival. She had given him love, and in return, he had given her purpose. And together, they had built a story not of abandonment, but of resilience. The world had tried to label them, to break them, but love had forged them stronger. And as Daniel stepped forward into his new life, Emily knew. The fire she saw in her son's eyes would one day change not just her world, but the world of everyone around him. When Daniel returned to his hometown after law school, the streets felt smaller, the houses a little more worn, and the people a little more tired than he remembered. Time had not been gentle on the town. Factories had closed, families were struggling, and laughter seemed to be something rare, like rain in the desert. But Daniel didn't just see broken roads and empty shops. He saw possibilities. He saw people who deserved better, people who reminded him of his mother, hardworking, humble, often overlooked. And he carried within him a fire that had been growing since childhood, a fire born of love and sacrifice, a fire that whispered, "Now is the time to give back." Daniel opened a small law office on Main Street. The sign above the door was simple: Daniel Carter, attorney at law. But the cases that came to him were anything but simple. He didn't chase wealth or prestige. Instead, he took on cases no one else wanted. Cases of eviction, unfair wages, and workers wronged by greedy employers. Neighbors began to notice. People whispered in grocery stores and coffee shops, "That Carter boy, he doesn't just fight for money, he fights for us." Daniel never forgot the nights he saw his mother scrubbing floors so he could eat. So when a single mother came to him, trembling as she faced losing her home, he worked day and night until justice was won. When an old man stood alone against a powerful company, Daniel stood beside him, his voice echoing in the courtroom, strong and unwavering. And each time he won, he didn't just bring justice, he restored hope. At home, Emily watched with quiet pride. She would sit by the window, sewing or reading, and wait for Daniel's knock on the door at the end of a long day. He would come in, loosen his tie, and sit with her at the kitchen table, the same table where years earlier they had shared bowls of thin soup. Now, their conversations were different. Daniel spoke of the cases he fought, the people he helped, and the vision he had for the town. Emily listened, her heart swelling with love, knowing her sacrifices had blossomed into something greater than she had ever dreamed. One night, Daniel looked at her across the table, his eyes shining. "Mama, this town deserves more. People here work hard, but they're not being heard. I think I need to do more than just practice law." Emily tilted her head, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "And what does more look like, my son?" Daniel paused, then spoke the words that would change everything. "It looks like running for mayor." The idea spread like wildfire. Some laughed at first. He was young, barely 30. What did he know about leading a town? But others, the ones who had sat across from him in courtrooms and watched him fight for the voiceless, knew better. His campaign wasn't built on money or polished speeches. It was built on heart. Daniel didn't hide behind podiums. He walked the streets, shook hands, and listened, really listened, to the people's stories. He remembered their names, their children, their struggles. At campaign rallies, he didn't just talk about policies. He told stories about his mother working double shifts, about the neighbors who helped them when they had nothing, about the people who were too often forgotten. "This town raised me," he said, his voice carrying across crowds. "And now I want to raise it up. Not alone, but together, with all of you." Crowds that began as dozens grew into hundreds. His passion was contagious. His honesty was undeniable. For the first time in years, the people of the town began to believe in something bigger than themselves. They began to believe in Daniel. On the night of the final campaign rally, Emily sat in the front row, her hands clasped in her lap. She wore a simple dress, the same one she had worn at his law school graduation, and though her hair had grown streaked with silver, her eyes still shone with the same warmth. Daniel stepped onto the stage, his voice steady, his heart pounding. He looked at the crowd, then at his mother, and spoke words that would never be forgotten. "When I was a boy, I promised my mother that one day she would never have to struggle again. I stand before you tonight, not just as her son, but as your son, as someone who belongs to this town, as someone who will never abandon it. If you trust me with your vote, I will fight for you with the same fire my mother lit in me." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emily's tears were quiet, rolling softly down her cheeks. She didn't need the applause. She had already won, because she had raised a man of honor. Election night arrived. The town gathered in the community hall, hearts pounding as results trickled in. Tension filled the air, mingling with the smell of coffee and anticipation. And then, at last, the announcement came. Daniel Carter had won. He was the youngest mayor the town had ever seen. The room exploded with cheers. Neighbors hugged one another, children danced, and Emily pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed with joy. Daniel walked to her, lifted her hand, and whispered, "We did it, Mama. This is for you." She looked into his eyes, her voice trembling. "No, Daniel, this is for all of us." And so, the boy who had once brought wildflowers to his mother now stood at the head of a town, sworn in as mayor. But his journey wasn't just about politics or power. It was about love, the love of a mother who never gave up, the love of a son who turned pain into purpose, and the love of a community that had been waiting for someone to believe in them again. As Daniel raised his hand and took the oath of office, Emily stood in the front row, her heart full. She had once been abandoned, left to raise a child on her own. Now, 30 years later, that child had risen higher than she had ever imagined, not just for himself, but for her, and for everyone who had ever felt unseen. Time has a way of catching up with everyone. For Richard, the years had not been kind. His once handsome face was lined with regret, his hair now streaked with gray. The charm that once won hearts had long since faded, leaving behind only the weight of choices he could not undo. He still lived in the old house on the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged, and weeds crept through cracks in the porch. It was more than a house. It was his last fortress, the only place where he felt some control, the only thing he had left to his name. But fate was preparing a storm, one that would knock on his very door. Across town, Mayor Daniel Carter was leading with a steady hand. He had only been in office a short time, But already change was visible. Streets were being repaired, new businesses were opening, and the people felt hope stirring again. One of Daniel's most passionate projects was a housing program designed to restore dignity to families who had been abandoned, neglected, or left behind. To Daniel, it wasn't just politics. It was personal. He had seen his mother suffer, had lived through those nights of hunger and despair. Now he was determined to build a system where no woman, no child, would have to face what his mother once faced. The list of candidates for the program was long, but one name stood out to Daniel's heart: Emily Carter. For Emily, it wasn't about charity, it was about justice. After years of sacrifice, the town would finally recognize what she had endured, and she would be given a new home. But there was one bitter twist. The home granted to her was none other than Richard's. Richard first learned of this on a cold morning. He shuffled to his mailbox, as he always did, expecting nothing more than bills and advertisements. Instead, he found an envelope from City Hall. He tore it open, his eyes narrowing as he read. The words blurred, but the meaning was sharp as a knife. His house was being reclaimed. Ownership was to be transferred. The beneficiary, Emily Carter. Richard's heart pounded. His hands trembled. "Emily," he muttered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. The past he had tried so hard to bury was rising again, no longer content to stay hidden. For days, Richard paced the floors of the house, the wooden boards groaning under his restless steps. Memories clawed at him. Emily's tearful face the night he left, the whispers of neighbors, the child he never met. But instead of remorse, anger filled him first. How dare they? How dare she? He convinced himself that this was an attack, that Daniel was using his power to humiliate him. At last, unable to contain himself, Richard marched into town. He stormed through the grand doors of City Hall, his voice echoing against the marble floors. "I need to see the mayor," he demanded, his fists clenched, his eyes wild. The receptionist hesitated, but before long, the door to the mayor's office opened. And there, standing tall in a dark suit, was Daniel. The moment hung heavy in the air. Richard froze. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes locked onto Daniel's. The resemblance was undeniable. The strong jaw, the determined eyes, even the way he carried himself. It was like looking into a mirror of the man Richard once was, only stronger, steadier, unbroken. Daniel knew at once. He didn't need introductions, didn't need explanations. He looked into Richard's face and saw the man who had abandoned him before he even drew his first breath. "Mr. Carter," Daniel said, his voice calm, though his chest ached with emotions he had buried for years. "I know why you're here." Richard stumbled forward. "You can't do this to me. That house, it's all I have left. You can't just take it away and hand it to her." Daniel's expression didn't change. "That house is more than wood and stone. It is justice long delayed. My mother deserves it. The people deserve to see what fairness looks like." Richard's voice cracked with desperation. "You don't understand. I've lost everything already. You can't take this from me too." Daniel leaned forward, his words sharp but steady. "No, you don't understand. You chose to walk away. You left my mother when she needed you most. You left me before I even had a chance to know your name. You built your life on selfishness, and now you're standing in front of the man who had to live with the consequences." Silence filled the office. Richard's chest heaved, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and shame. For a moment, he saw not the mayor, but the boy he had abandoned. A boy who had grown without him, who had succeeded despite him. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping. "You're my son." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I am her son, my mother's son, the woman who worked herself to the bone to give me a chance at life. You gave me nothing but absence." The words struck Richard harder than any physical blow. He staggered back, clutching at the edge of the desk. Daniel stood tall, his eyes never leaving Richard's. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of a lifetime. "The house belongs to her now, not because I want revenge, but because justice demands it. You taught me nothing, Richard, but my mother taught me everything: strength, love, sacrifice. And today, she receives the dignity you denied her." Richard's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he saw the truth with painful clarity. He had lost more than a house. He had lost the chance to be part of his son's life, the chance to love, to be forgiven. Daniel turned away, signaling the conversation was over. "Goodbye, Mr. Carter." Richard stumbled out of City Hall into the cold daylight, the weight of his mistakes pressing down harder than ever. He looked back once, hoping for a glance, a shred of mercy. But Daniel didn't come after him. Back at home, Emily received the keys to the house that once symbolized Richard's pride. She stood tall, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. It wasn't just about moving into a building. It was about reclaiming her story. And somewhere in the distance, Richard walked alone, burdened by the ghosts of the choices he could never undo. For 30 long years, Emily carried the weight of abandonment on her shoulders. She raised her son alone, through hunger, shame, and endless nights of labor. She endured whispers, loneliness, and heartbreak, but never gave up. And now, at last, justice had arrived. She stood in front of the old house, the house that once belonged to Richard. Its peeling paint and broken shutters did not frighten her. To her, this house was not ruin, but rebirth. With the keys in her hand, she felt the power of victory course through her veins. This was more than a home. This was proof that she had survived and triumphed. When Emily stepped across the threshold, the wooden floor groaned beneath her feet. Dust floated in the air, sunlight breaking through cracked curtains. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let it wash over her. This was not Richard's place anymore. This was hers. She thought of the nights she had cried, holding baby Daniel in her arms, wondering how she would ever make it. She thought of the whispers, the pity, the judgment. And now, she smiled through tears. Those whispers were gone. Those nights were over. She had won. Across town, Richard wandered the streets like a ghost. He no longer had the house, the pride he clung to, or the illusions he told himself. All that remained was emptiness. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of what he had lost. He saw mothers with children, fathers teaching sons, families gathered at dinner tables. And he knew those were the moments he had thrown away. But worst of all, he saw Emily. Not directly, but in posters, in speeches, in conversations. The people admired her, respected her, celebrated her strength. She was no longer the woman he abandoned. She was the mother of the mayor, the quiet queen of the town's heart. Richard, once charming, once free, was now nothing. Fate brought them face to face one last time. Richard stood at the gate of the house, staring at it like a man watching his life slip away. Emily stepped out onto the porch, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two people bound by a past that refused to die. His voice cracked. "Emily, please. That house was all I had." Emily's reply was calm, sharp as a blade. "You had more than a house, Richard. You had a family. You had me. You had Daniel. And you threw it all away." He swallowed hard, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I was young. I was scared. I made mistakes." Emily stepped closer, her voice steady, filled with fire. "Mistakes? No, Richard. You made choices. And every choice you made was to leave, to abandon, to protect yourself instead of us. But look at me now. Look at what you left behind." She lifted her chin, her voice rising, strong enough for the world to hear. "I raised a son who became mayor. I raised a man who carries more honor in his heart than you ever did. And now, this house is mine. My victory. My revenge. Not with anger, but with dignity." Richard's shoulders slumped. He had no words left. He turned, and for the first time in his life, he walked away without pride, without excuses. Just emptiness. Later that evening, Daniel arrived. He walked through the door, his eyes sweeping the old house, and found his mother standing tall in the middle of the living room. He wrapped his arms around her. "Mama, it's yours now. You earned this." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, Daniel, we earned this. Together." He pulled back to look at her. "Do you feel it? The victory?" She smiled, a smile lined with years of pain, but glowing with triumph. Yes, not just over him, but over everything. Over the shame, the hunger, the whispers. We won, Daniel. We won. Word spread quickly. The people of the town knew the story. How Richard had left, how Emily had endured, how Daniel had risen. Neighbors came to the house, bringing flowers, gifts, and embraces. They told Emily, "You are an inspiration." They told Daniel, "You are a son to be proud of." The town that once whispered behind her back now lifted her name with honor. And Emily realized something beautiful. Victory wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her story. It was about standing tall after decades of being made small. One evening, Emily sat on the porch of her new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. Daniel stood beside her, strong and steady, the living proof of her sacrifices. She thought of Richard, not with love, not even with hate, but with finality. He was part of her past, but no longer part of her story. Her story was this: the boy she raised, the man he had become, and the justice that had finally come full circle. Emily turned to Daniel, her voice soft but filled with power. For years, they thought we were broken. But we were never broken, Daniel. We were only waiting for this moment. And now we have one. Daniel smiled, taking her hand. Yes, Mama, we have one.